Rabbi Target, I'm starting late. Can I have the extra 10 minutes? Right. You tell Shalom, you shouldn't come for 10:30. So, hi, thanks so much. Oh goodness. Okay, this time I bought my own Mamikay sheets. Sheets. 3-4 hours with the Let's start. Oh, it's being recorded. I have to see this, right? That's right. Okay, good. You must be able to find a place to sit. Relax, come on. Sit. There's a place over here. You want to sit here? Yeah, they're running your way. I see about my own army. Okay, let's start. Topic of the evening is basically, is this in English? Yeah. It's in English, right? Speak Hebrew. Okay, the topic of the evening is obviously the unique meaning and avodas Hashem, which is neget Shemini Atzeres. So this is a long topic. I highly doubt I will be able to finish it within the hour and quarter allotted to me, starting now at 9 o'clock. But whatever we finish, and whatever not, we'll finish in Kambiyavna. What can be. We know the Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah that Tezayin to B'chag Nidonim Alamai. In Sukkos there's a Yom Adin. There's place here if you want to sit here. If you don't mind my back. See what happens. This is what the Egglazov looks like. This is what the Egglazov looks like. That's what it looks like. The one great thing, God had a great audience. When he gave the Torah on Sinai, it was so quiet, even the birds didn't chirp. You understand? I like that. I think that's how Torah is supposed to be taught. So let's try to keep this like quiet because I don't want to scream. I don't have a loudspeaker here, and I really have a lot to talk about. And I want to say, Rabbi, is my coffee happening? That I need my fix. Okay, let's start this again. Okay, so we know that the Gemara says in Hoshana that B'chag Nidonim Alamai. We know that. We know specifically that coming Hoshana Raba. We talk about willows and things like that. These are all things which need moisture and water a lot, different peiros. It's interesting. The Nevuchim discusses why after these peiros are the meaning. He discusses the fact that they are common in Eretz Yisrael, cheap. He says, actually, would you believe it? I paid 400 shekels for an esrog, and they tell me it's cheap. You know what I mean? It's common and it stays fresh for 7 days. That's what I'm right. That's why God decided that we should use these fruit because these fruit are common, cheap, and can hold well for 7 days. But there's also a certain aspect, specifically the Arabas, we talk about water, as you obviously all know, our Paiskim, which our poskim which say we don't pass that way la'alacha that arvei nachal is ma'aker has to be dafka rubbish which grow by a nachal. I mean most which is interesting. I don't recall too many people being makbid on that. I mean for goodness sakes, relax. I mean the fact that it's a sachko de rabbono zecher lemigdash. So daf makbid dafka and arvei nachal for that. With daf zayin for that. But whatever it is, but in the deraisa, there's definitely makin to be makbid arvei nachal. The idea of water. Water is a very dominant reality in Sukkos. You have nisach hamayim. Nisach hamayim, the libations of the water, which is very unique for Sukkos and nowhere else. Whatever the meanings of that is not the issue of today. But whatever it is, that seems to be that's the way it is. Now, there's an interesting Gemara in Tainus. The Gemara says in Tainus, and I'll start with this. Gemara says in Tainus, Abzayin, Omer Bavo, Godel Yom Akshamim, Mitchias HaMeisim. It's pretty heavy. Yom Hakshamim, Mitchias HaMeisim. Omer of Yehuda, Godel Yom Hakshamim, Ki Yom Shenitna B'Torah. Right, I'm skipping. Another one says, Gadol Yom Shamim Nitna Torah. Raba says, Gadol Yom Shamim. Shiyom Shenivu Shamayim V'Oretz. So this is the Gemara in Tainus. The idea is somehow Yom Shamim. What does Yom Shamim mean? Every time it rains in Eretz Yisrael, there's a lot of Matan Torah happening. Vos meint is Gadol Yom Shamim Ki Yom Shenitna B'Torah Ki Yom Tchias HaMeisim Ki Bria Shamayim V'Oretz. Obviously, one has to understand what it means. And what does it mean, Yom Hageshamim? So there's an interesting ha'ora of the Koshitzer Magid. He was a Goyen Olam. He was a Koshitzer Magid writes in Avodas Yisrael of Koshitzer. He writes as follows. He says, Nirmas Bikana Yom Chag Shemini Atzeres. V'kinu oto b'shem Yom HaKshamim al Shem shemvarchim bo morid hageshem v'naset b'chinat kshamim yodim. Whenever I see the word b'chinat, I get nervous. I once had a charusa with her footnote son-in-law, Baruch Hashem, he's alive, he's a young man anymore, Yonis David. We had a charusa, we used to learn whatever, not Gemara, other things. So I remember I said, I have two conditions. First of all, we will say talk only English and not a single word of Yiddish. Why? Because this way I'll understand, what you're saying. B, you will never use the word bechina for me. It's a bechina of. What does that mean exactly? Can you translate that in English? It's a bechina of. What does that mean? It means you don't know how to explain it, so you call it the bechina of some kind of celestial car accident or whatever it only be. So when I see the word bechina, I get a little nervous. What does it mean over here when the Koshitzer Magid writes that Yom HaKshamim is Shemini Atzeres, because in Shemini Atzeres, Mevorchim B'Morid HaGeshem, V'naset B'chinat Kshamim Yordim. What does this mean? Now, Lamaisa, this is, one who knows the Chachma knows how much this is Meduik, it's almost frightening. Every word is Mamish Meduik, it's also a Gra, if you really want to know. What does this mean? So let me explain this as follows. We know, it's quite common, in the Western world that, Shul, some people go to Shul twice a year, right? 3 times a year, for Yizkor, whatever it be, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, everyone buys a ticket and goes to your house of worship. We find the Yerushalmi in Rosh Hashanah saying a very similar thing about Judaism in Talmudic times. And the pasuk, Oisi Yom Yom Yidroshun, that they come to seek me in Shul twice a year, Yom Yom, literally twice a year, is due to Tekiah va'arava. Yom Tekiah means they all went for Rosh Hashanah, and they all went for Arava. This, the Gemara brings a raya that Tekiah is in the afternoon. It's Musaf, it's late, not in Shachris, because it's written over here. The young ones don't wake up on time for Shachris, right? They all run into Shul. The people that come in, like, the meeting starts at 9, they somehow get there around 10:30. So that's when the shaking Gemara. That's why the Tekiah says down Musaf, to make sure that the Ketanim, or the Ketanim does not mean Bajim Mitzvahs. It means, the younger ones, that they will wake up on time, and therefore they'll come to Tekiah and Arava. So we clearly see the importance of everybody used to convene in Shul, specifically on Yom Arava. Now, what's the idea of why on Yom Arava? You have to understand what this really is. The idea behind this is the mice. It's found in Sefer Amanig. Okay, I'm trying to get this as niggle as possible. The Sefer Amanig writes over there in Hilchos Hoshana Raba. Taking Sefer Amanig, this is Migdolei HaRishonim, one of the obvious of the minig of the minhagim of Sorfas. This is very important to know. This is the Sefer Amanig, and he writes. Ki b'Hoshana Raba mekuyemes chasimas gimel hasform aptuchim pnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You know, every star needs a kiyum. You have to ratify. It seems to be that in Hoshana Raba there's a kiyum, the ratification of the chasima, which was written on Yom Kippur. And now there's a kiyum. Interesting halacha. This is a star. This is a sefer which somehow is told in kiyum. Mekuyem. This is a lashon. Okay, Mekuyem is a chasima. It's gimel a swarm of ptuchim pnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'nechtamim b'yom HaKippurim. Uba Hoshana Raba, which is tonight, tachlis hakapora. This is not a simple evening, not a simple day at all. People don't chop. They think it's Erev Simchas Torah. Nay. Das ist tachlis hakapora. B'shikva hitanenu me'erev Rosh Hashanah ad Yom HaKippurim v'nimchalu ha'avonos hazdonos v'apshoim v'achai v'mises shogim hem goylim ma'abatim l'sukkos. The Sukkos is supposed to be somewhat of a golus, and therefore part of what's needed, golus is needed for kapora, and the things which you need kapora of chayv and mitzvah shogigit. So the Sukkos is somewhat of a golus. Shem tiras arei v'al zen is kapelanu a golus. V'alulav shemenanim lo idea ki nitzachnu et kol ha'mitkaimim aleinu. It's like the knights in the medieval knights used to, after they used their jousting, they used to hold their spears high, okay, showing that they won the game over here. This is what happened. We see it clearly that Leila Hoshana Raba, we see Hoshana Raba was a big thing, a big Yom Tefillah, because this was the Kiyum HaChasima. This is the Gemara Kapora. In other words, there's still a possibility of fixing that which you may have not done that well on Yom Kippur, and may have not done that well on Rosh Hashanah and Atzeres and Teshuvah. You may not have done well. It can happen. I don't want to talk about what happened after Yom Kippur. Busy, I don't know. The Mendel says the Torah brings Rishon and Cheshbon Avonis. Wow, man! Thank God we had but it started already on Sukkos. Atzeres on the shir and on the neck. I don't think anybody here said Tzlach Lona Avinu was a bracha shein et tzricha. Nashivein Avinu l'sarstach was a bracha levatal. Whoever thinks it was a bracha shein et tzricha and bracha levatal, please stand up and I'll kiss your hands. We're all a bunch of, I don't know anybody did Teshuvah. I'm an old sinner. Okay, literally sinner man. You know what I mean? Okay, you know what I mean? What can you do? Whatever it be. So we have to understand that the Hoshana Raba tonight is Tachlis HaKapora. That's why it says the minig is, as he brings down, therefore, with the Chad, there are people that stay up all night and they say Tehillim. And there's an idea of the Chazan wearing a kittel. We say a lot of Hoshana. Hoshana is the equivalent of Slichus. It's Asay Leman, Asay Leman, Asay Leman. I don't know if you realize what those Hoshanas are. Those are your Slichus. Those are really your Slichus. If you know how to read your Hoshanas, you realize what is happening. This is a Yom Din. It's a Yom Din. Ad Kidei Kach. There's a Sifri Shulchan Aruch about not looking at the moon tonight. Because it seems to be that whatever happens in your din can somehow be reflected in the moon. Whatever it is, that's my business. I don't want to know, and I never look. About Sifri Shulchan Aruch, I know. So we have to take this very seriously. This is really a very serious day. One has to understand that it's not just a day. Let's sleep to have koyach for hakafas. You have to be out of your freaking box. Hakafas is a minig which happened late, which actually started by nothing more than an idea of walking the Sefer Torah from the Oren to the Kriyas Torah. Then the later times of the Ari, they started walking around 7 times, and that's it. The whole Hakafas took 10 minutes. The idea of making a whole hoo-ha of Rikudim and Mechayis never happened in Yiddishkeit. It happened very, very, very late. It's what you would call modern Judaism. Moshe Rabbeinu would not recognize it, neither would Rabbeinu HaKodesh, neither would Abai Rava, neither would Reb Chia Rav Ashi. You have to understand that. Ad Kei Kach is written in Teshuvah Sagoinim. This was only a minig of Bavel because they used to finish Kriyas Torah every year. The minig at Yisrael, they finish Kriyas Torah once in 3 years. Who ever heard of such a thing? It's Hakotel Yom Tov Sheni of Shemini Atzeres. Now it's forget here in Yisrael. People forget that Shemini Atzeres and they call it Simchas Torah, which is a joke. Agam lichba shisamal ke'imi v'bayis. Iker din deiraisa we forget about, and all of a sudden you're talking about some minig of the Kufas Agoinim. This is what you call the day. You chap what you're doing. We're running away from Yitzuma Yishayim. Everyone knows about Simchas Torah. Who knows what Shemini Atzeres is? And is anybody celebrating Shemini Atzeres? That's a serious question. We're all thinking about the Torah. Isn't that? And then you say, well, you're so happy that you did a siyum and chamisha chumsha Torah. Okay, I'm cool. I hope you all go to minyan and mamish here krisa Torah sheni v'chamishi, etc. You're so happy you made a siyum. It's not a siyum of Babli Yerushalmi Sifrasi from Mechilta. This is not good Teshuvah peh. I want to put this on the table. So garnish, mid garnish, mid garnish. People walk around with a choice. It's a joke. It's a siyum of Kriyas Torah, Torah Shemiksav, not of Tanakh, of Torah. Let's get this on the table. Let's understand what we're doing here before we go further. And if you're really rejoicing, try to understand why are Jews, and is it developed that they're rejoicing so much on Chamisha Chumsha Torah? Meila Shver Rashba Versteich. Meila, if you finish the Chveisva, Seder Kotchim, Seder Tyrus, Chamisha Chumsha Torah, you know, it's that big deal. Obviously it is. Obviously it is. Don't you think, by the way, that's what Simchas Torah is, so one has to figure out, what are you guys getting so nervous about? And what did I do? They said, Atzeres, according to Chveis, how we dafim and Gemara, you're going to learn. What's for something Gemara? It's a time of Simchas Torah. You should know Chumash. Why are you mixing Teshuvah and Teshuvah? This isn't Matan Torah. What is this? It's a chagiga of a siyum of Torah Shebiksav, which is nilmud berabim. That's the ikar takana of Talmud Torah berabim of Torah Shebiksav. So why are we getting all that nervous? There are a lot of questions would have to be asked, and that's Simchas Torah. Now, why all of a sudden has that become the way we celebrate Shemini Atzeres? So Mele Ba'uns Litvikis, we don't do it in the Chutzlars that way. No, but by the Chassidim, we know they do Hakofas even Shemini Atzeres. And that was the minig of the Ari. No. I want to understand, what is the uniqueness? Is there any reason to explain how Simcha with the Torah, the way it's being done, has anything to do with Shemini Atzeres? It has to be done the Kaf Sukkos. There's so many people in Eretz Yisrael that they don't know the word Shemini Atzeres, if not for the Siddur. Simchat Torah. You'll see. Simchat Torah by Yeshiva. There's a settle in the beginning, at the entrance of Cave by the base. Simchat Torah by Yeshiva. What's Simchas Torah? Shemini Atzeres by Yeshiva. No. Even B'nai Torah, that's Simchat. What's Simchat Torah? Vasilos. It's a serious question. I mean, I think we have to answer this question, because if not, our Judaism becomes meaningless. So let's just start by this. So here we have an idea that the Ikka thing is Hoshana Raba. Now the source of this, now here's going to something else that you may have heard. This also has to be explained. The source of all this idea of Hoshana Raba is Isaiah HaKadosh in Parsha Sav, Lamed Beis, Lamed Beis, where the Lashon of the Zohar HaKadosh is the Yom HaShvi'ah, on the 7th day of Sukkos, the Chag, Hu Siyuma de Dina, that the end of the din. When I said it's a Yom Din, the Manig only said it's Tachlis HaKapora. Here the Rashbi writes it's Siyuma de Dina. No, there's still the Makalus sword hanging over our heads. Siyuma de Dina, steht in Zohar HaKadosh, the Alma. Upitkin nafkin bibei malka. And then the verdict notes, leave the house of the king equals the court has disseminated, has given out, as they have left the courtroom. Pitkin of the nafkin bibei malka. Doesn't say that you got it. It says what? Pitkin nafkin bibei malka. That's the lashon of the question. That's the muck of this whole thing. But the emes says, Shemini Atzeres is the same thing. State in, I have to set this up before I go further. In Kitzur Kavanis, which is basically a Kitzur, the Kavanis of the Ari, written by the Ramchal, he writes and he says, in Indian Rosh Hashanah, he writes, V'acha Yom Kippurim, Sha'abinya Nishlam Kvar, after Yom Kippur, God set up the system, how he's going to interact with this all. Basically, existence is a big construction site from Rosh Hashanah till Yom Kippur. And God has to figure out, take all the variables into account, what's going to be the anhaga of God with reality. Ma'yeh, depending on what we did, etc. Okay? So l'chayret, it's the buildings finished. They took in the mezuzahs, they clapped the mezuzahs, and Yom Kippur, that's a done deal. So they says, Acha Yom Kippurim shabi in addition far ein oy tikva ela bedoichak. Afal pikein, and this is something to hear now. This is the mocker that calls Magid. Ad Musaf Shemini Atzeres Yesh Takana. This is taking it not just Shemini Hoshana Raba. This is already the Ari. This is the Ramchal. It's basically nothing more than Kitzur, the Kavanas of the Ari. There is still a takana until Musaf Shemini Atzeres. Ava Misham ve'elech ein takana oid. You understand what these 2 days are. Your whole life depends on them. On how to use Hoshana Rabbah and Shemini Atzeres correctly. It's so funny. I think about Shemini Atzeres and Yisrael. They think it's Chutz La'aretz, and they throw towels at the chazan at Musaf. They do funny things. More the kula the Musaf of Shemini Atzeres. That's your ne'ilah. Do you chap? That's ne'ilah. Musaf of Shemini Atzeres is ne'ilah, and you're acting, you're clowning. What are you doing? So steht befurish afal pikein ad Musaf Shemini Atzeres yesh takana. Av misham ve'elech ein takana oid. Pretty rough. There's a big difference. One is nafke b'bei malka, and one is nimser b'yadam for amishorsim. The Zohar Kodesh says nafke b'bei malka. They go out of the office. Basically, the secretary takes them out of the office. But when are they put into the yad of the shluchim? The shluchim means the malachim, which are mamuna on the anhaga. That's when it's anhaga starts. The decision process, but when is it given? Okay, the Yipui Koyach, the Ramchal explains it by Chava in Adir B'Morim. He has a book on the Tekunim where he explains literally that yes, the Anhaga is activated, but Poyo Mamish Musaf Shemini Atzeres. Then, if you haven't fixed it, until then you can fix things. Show you another lashon of the Ramchal in Kavanis for Sukkos. It's even clearer. I just want to set up what we're doing here before we should understand what these nights are. Leil Hoshana Rabba Nasa HaChoisem. What's made Nasa HaChoisem? So we have the Mock of the Manik, means it's a Kiyum of the Choisem. The emes says that he explains the two Chsimas, and that's what he writes further. Ki b'yoma kippurim b'ne'ilah nechtemu. And he explains what kind of Chasima that is. V'kan Nasa Choisem Sheni, what the Mani calls Kiyum, it's right, it's a handpick. It's Choisem Sheni on the first Choisem. You need two Chasimas. Well, I'm not going to explain the Kabbalistic language here because that would take me forever. This is the end of the day. And then we say, Mispalim on Hoshana Rabba, Mispalim la Kadosh Baruch Hu al Chasima Toiva Kemoi B'Yom Kippurim. Do you understand what you say? What your Ma'ariv was supposed to look like? It took you guys 12 minutes for Ma'ariv. What your Ma'ariv was supposed to look like, what your Shachris is supposed to look like, what your Musaf is supposed to look like. This is Yom Kippurim. We mispalin the state and portion of the Kavod. Mispalin la Kadosh Baruch Hu Chasim Matayva Kimai b'Yom Kippurim. Ki adayin yesh tikva. There's still hope. V'aymer Mishna Torah v'Hisvarim Shatilim. Whatever the reason be, I'm not going into it. V'holchin Litval Kimai b'Erev Yom Kippurim. People that go to the mikveh just like Erev Yom Kippurim before the Torah year, they need to go. It's button Rishonim. Okay, who are the namis? I read the same thing as Hoshana Raba. V'kiva shenasas b'layla zeh chaysim sheni. As what it is, so there's a thing that has to be done. Okay, that's just to understand what we're talking about. So this all tells us what Hoshana Raba is, and finally the idea of the chasima. To have it clear, I want to read a Gra. And this is where it gets. I'm showing you something. The Gra writes in Be'er Avram, which is the Pirush of Tilim of Avram ben Agra, and the Mizmor of David Hashem Oy V'Yishi, which is Tilim Be'er Chav Zayin. Trying to be, I don't like to say Beich source. This one is like what's real. So we know the Chazal say Oiri Zeh Rosh Hashanah. We are somehow illuminated in Rosh Hashanah. One has to explain what that means. We attain Om. We attain illumination on Rosh Hashanah. If you be a Buddhist, you'd appreciate this more. And ultimately, and then afterwards, the Yishu, we attain salvation on Yom Kippurim, which I will explain. Then it says afterwards, when it comes to Shemini Atzeres, Dr. Gra, this is the second Pirush there. The first one's from Rabbi Ramban Gra, and the second one's from the Gra himself. He writes, Mi'ovi Agoyen. Kineged Chag Shemini Atzeres. Shul Chaluk b'Pazar Kashev. It has a unique identity of a yontiv b'fnei atzmai. Ubo Gemar HaChasima. That's the what we just read before, the lashon of the Ari. Ubo Gemar HaChasima l'chol hadinim. Which is already we're talking about. So the kiyum of the Chasima is in the Hoshana Raba. But the Gemar of that, as we explained, what does it mean? Pitkin Yotzim, there's Pitkin Nimsar. And the Pitkin Nimsarim are only Gemar Chasima l'chol hadinim. Why? Zok the Gra lefisha boy maskiring gvuras shichamim. So this word of the so Kashin said Lamaisa das is Agra. Brought it back home. Shemini Atzeres Sheboy Maskirin Gvuras Shamim. That says Yoim Hag Shamim. That's Yoim Gemara Chasim of all the dinim and the avodah of Elul, Hoshana, Yom Kippur, V'chulu. This is the shiyum of whatever. This is when the game's over. Whatever we did until that, we did. Whatever we didn't. Look up the Gemara Rosh Hashanah, what it says, what it takes to tear Gzar Din. Well, Tfilas Yachid definitely doesn't work. Tfilas Rabim, that's a Gemara. I suggest you look it up. It's B'daichi Gadol. I'm trying to say here we have unbelievable what we have. We have here tonight, tomorrow night, and Biz Shemini Atzeres by Musaf after Tfilas Geshem. That's all. It's an unbelievable thing. It's like 2 days Rosh Hashanah, 2 days Yom Kippur. Forget. It's like 2 days Yom Kippur. It's Ne'ilah. One has to chop that. And I really say, because I'm sorry to say what I see, people are not aware of these things. The problem is they know a lot of words here and there. They're not aware of basic ideas of Anhagas Yiddishkeit. This is Ne'ilah. It's definitely not a time to laugh and be joyful and throw towels at the chazan, to flip him, whatever they do by the skabel over there. This kid can do in chutzlords dot in Yontif Sheni because there's no chasima then. Okay, that's that you can do the Doin Eretz Yisrael. That's Sayim Kodesh V'Noira. It's a different hanhaga here. The idea of Litzanis and the other thing that we find Nebuch and Chutzlot and Sukkos Torah, guys, they do a little kiddush over there, and they make a sha'akal on the kiddush, and they're not samech on the Divrei Chaim. They think are revius with this kiddush. You know what I mean? Maybe if you're samech on the Divrei Chaim that believes it's a double chorif, you can do a little glezel. No, they're mocked with a chaznish shishir. Elamai, it should be Lefrog selected 18-year-old. You understand? You get a good kick in the back, and then you're going to say Masha V'Ruach U'Merid Agoshen. The thought of it is frightening. Okay, I say this because it's really very important to put this on the table. I'm not joking when I say this. So this just to build this together, I now know exactly what's happening here. I now know that basically somehow Gvuras Kshamim, the fact that there's Geshem, the tefillah of Geshem, is the reason why the culmination of the Torah Voida, it happened on Shemini Atzeres, and is uniquely part of Shemini Atzeres. It's not b'mikra. It feels Geshem is gufa de uvde from kedushas hayom of Shemini Atzeres. Let's try to understand what this is and what it means to us practically. That's really what we have to deal with. So the Maaseh goes like this. The famous Gra written in Shir Hashirim on the Pasuk Perik Aleph Halacha Pasuk Dalet. Moshcheni acharecha narutza. Draw me after you and we will run. Heviani amelech hadarav. The king brings me into his private chambers. Nagila, we will rejoice for nismacha and we will be happy. Bach, with you. And that's obviously mean to say, well, you will basically draw us, and we will run after you and enter your private sanctum. We're talking about, shall we say honestly, about the cloud you saw asking God, doing what you call Dutch dating. She's basically pushing herself into an intimate situation. Read Shir Kipshutai, right? What are we talking about? Moshcheni acharecha narutza. You have to remember the Rama Mehichtas Teshuvah writes that all of Shir Hashirim is really an erotic poem of frustrated love, which was not realized if you read the Megillah, okay, without art scroll. Just read it for what it is on its own. And then you have to understand that the Rama Mehichtas Teshuvah, this is just a mushal to what our relationship is supposed to be in our love for God. We are also very frustrated. And we also want this intimate relationship, and this is what this is about. I once quoted in Yeshiva Reshis Chachma, Yidoliam Kubalim, Kadmoinim, where the Reshis Chachma writes in Shar Avos Hashem, Kol mi she'lo to'am avos isha hareu kechamoyer la'avat Hashem. Whoever has not tasted true love, I don't mean hormonal reactions of the teenager. I mean true love of man and woman. He is like a jackass, a dumb oaf, okay, when it comes to Avos Hashem. Why is it the Reshis Chacham Kimina Muchash Yavoy Elamupshot? It is only when you have something tangible can you have to conceptualize it and have some kind of iota what it means to fall in love with something which is transcendent. But you will never experience it until you know. That's what the Gemara says. It means this. What you mean? She's going to teach me says what's means? I don't think my my wife very much, but I don't ask her pshat in the Rajba. You know what I mean? Where I teach, my colleagues in Nishmat, I can talk about the Chivas Rajba. My wife went to Gates. What can I do? And then university didn't teach it, so what can I do? She didn't have Talmud in no too. Okay, but at the end of the day, it's a mushal. It's a mushal. The whole idea of the relationship of male and female, which is really expressed on beautiful, frustrated love. That's what this is. I don't know if you ever really read Shir Hashirim. Please do not use Art Scroll. Because Art Scroll decided that they don't think that God is wise. And God allowed this to be in the Ksuvim, right? No, they decided to translate only through the Medrash. And therefore walk away from the words, only the Medrash, and then Gamarnu, so you don't understand what God wanted. God wanted you to understand the mashal of Ish ve'isha. And then afterwards, take that as a mashal to Avos Hashem. So I must say the honest truth, that is that one Art Scroll book which I really suggest you don't buy. Okay? I mean, that's mamish against Tanakh. So you have to understand, yes. So this pasuk says, basically, we ask God for an intimate relationship. Then we will be happy with you. In other words, in context of this intimate encounter, I will be rejoiced with you, with your presence, with your existence. I will recall your love which is tastier than wine. Mesharim Evucha, those who think straightforward will really, really love you. Now, this is obviously the symbolism. Look, the Gra, that this pasuk goes on Shemini Atzeres. That what Shemini Atzeres is, Moshcheni Acharecha Narutza Haviani Amelech Hadarav Nagila Benisbachobach. Look, the Gra over here, Mefushim Persik Dalit, that this goes on Shemini Atzeres. Moshcheni Acharecha Narutza Hu Neged Shemini Atzeres Shuli Yisrael Levadoi. This is a time where we have an intimate encounter with God, which, so to speak, no one else is with us. Sukkos is a very cosmopolitan holiday. It's actually a very not Jewish holiday. If you realize we are praying for humanity, the Purim, it just says Rosh Hashanah is totally a cosmopolitan holiday. You don't pray for yourself, you pray for the dominion of God, culture, and awareness for all of humanity. V'yeda kol pa'ul ki atof al toy v'yavin kol yitzur ki atoy yitzar toy v'yomar kol Hashem neshama b'apoy havai l'kim melech v'chulu. This is clearly a holiday which God does not want to be a king of a small little tribe. He wants to be a king of all creation. We are nothing more than the locomotive of the train which was bring this into fruition. The same thing is true. Sukkos. Sukkos is rejoicing as we see. We pray for the Umas Oilam, Shivim Purim Achag, Porei Achag, which are Mismaitim Ba'archim. Finally, on Shemini Atzeres, we talk about ourselves. Are you aware of it? Are you aware of the significance of Sukkos being something to do with humanity? I can talk all night. I'm not going to do it, but this is a very important part of Sukkos. It's a very important part of Sukkot. Ad kedei kach, that the bechina, whether Umas Ha'olam we were successful, Umas Ha'olam are part, can they go into the sukkah? Can't they go into the sukkah? Does the Navi describes a test? If they will go into this, come into the Oilam regular Sukkos, they're part of the deal of redemption. If they're not, out. Sukkos is a cosmopolitan holiday which we deal with the Umas Ha'olam, and we, as the locomotive of history, should be responsible for bringing them there and praying for that in reality. But Shemini Atzeres is a day of an intimate relationship. This is a pure Jewish holiday. Now, in that intimate relationship, so on the pasuk Haviani Amelech Hadarav, Zok the Gra, Hu Moyed Bi'asan LeEretz Yisrael. Haviani Amelech Hadarav, that means Eretz Yisrael. Now, I'll explain a little later, give the background, but this is what it's about. This describes Shemini Atzeres, my friends, is somehow has to do with the fact that Baruch Hashem, we've come to Eretz Yisrael. But it's not enough. What does Chadarav mean in Eretz Yisrael? It doesn't just mean being in the land. V'iyan Chadarav hem Chadrei Torah. Ki ikar HaTorah hu be'eretz Yisrael. כמו שכתוב, מלכה ושריה בגויים, אין תורה. If we don't have a government, a Jewish government in the land of Israel, as Baruch Hashem we have today, the ultimate Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be in Mitzvah with the Gemara, Geula, and Mashiach ben David Yeshivat, Kisei HaMalchus. Okay? At that point in time, there'll be Malchus Hashem. David sits on Kisei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as we know. So the pshat is Malka v'Sareh b'Agoyim. If we don't have a government, if we don't have a Jewish Malchus in Eretz Yisrael, ain't Torah, that's not called learning Torah. Ad kedei kach that the Gra writes in Perek Vav Shir Hashirim that the tragedy of Golus is that if the three Amudim ha'olam, Torah and Avodah and Gemilas Chasadim, so it says in Golus there's no Torah. Malka v'Sareh b'Agoyim ain't Torah. Avodah, we have what you call erzatz. We have a supplement instead. It's like having shikari instead of coffee. You understand? You have tefillah instead of karbanos. Avodah zeichet, they don't have what's supposed to be. The only thing that's left in Golus is whole is gemilas chasadim. Very important Gra to know in Perek Vav Shir Hashem. You should learn it. I'm giving you a lot of ideas, homework to think about. I mean to say it's a davar chashuv that it's very big. You said the only amud which we have b'shleimus is gemilas chasadim. Torah is not b'shleimus and avoid is not b'shleimus. Now, what does this mean? This is a question which asks, what does he mean by that? What does he mean when he says that Shemini Atzeres is the idea of Eretz Yisrael and Torah's Eretz Yisrael? Somehow we're going to have to understand how that connects to Shemini Atzeres. But let's first focus on the idea of Ein Torah ki im Torah's Eretz Yisrael, because Malka v'Surah b'Goyim Ein Torah. What does this mean? And the answer lies, as usual, in another gra. I don't like saying both words. We say at the end of davening, but also found at the end of Pirkei Avos, you have the famous Mishna, where it says, "Yiratzon shibana beis hamikdash u'meher b'yameinu v'seichel keinu b'sarasecha and Perik Ei Mishna Chav Gimel." So all the Darshanim always ask, what's this got to do with the beginning of the Mishnah? There it says, Yudah ben Teimaymer, Oz Kenemer, be brazen, etc. Ratz Kitzvi, Gibber Kari, Latzichin, Adifish Vashamayim. And then it ends, Yirotin Shibana Beis Hamikdash, Meher B'Yameinu, V'Seichel Keinu, B'Seichel. The Gra Ish Emesu says it's a typo. It's not what's supposed to be. The printers put it there. It's supposed to be at the end of the Perik, because this is the end of Masechta Avos. Every child knows that the sixth Perik is Brises. It's not Mishnais. The Mishnais ends with that Perik. And this is supposed to be the Esiyim of the Masechta. So there are two Masechtas which end this way. Tamid ends this way, because Tamid deals with the Beis HaMikdash. So we end Tamid with Yiratzon Sheibana Beis HaMikdash, Meher B'Yameinu V'Seichel Keinu B'Sarasecha. And Masechtas Avos also, he's going to explain 2 minutes, also should end the same way. So that part of the Mishnah is really not part of the Mishnah of Yudah ben Taim. It's a very important thing to know. Saves you a lot of headaches. You don't have to listen to a lot of speeches. The emissaries, this is the seam of the Masechta. Why? And here's the insight. Zok to grow up. The fi shu klal haTorah. Masechtas Avos is klal haTorah. Moshe Kibul Torah Sinai v'chulu. Ve'ein Torah below Beis Hamikdash. K'moshe Kasuv Malka v'Sareh Bagoyim Ein Torah. Oma Yiratzon Sheyibane V'Seichel Keinu B'Sarasecha K'moshe Ne'emar brings the pasuk in Yeshayahu Perek Yud Aleph U'mal'oh ha'aretz das es Hashem k'mayim liyam mechasim. The Gra elaborates this, I said before, also in Shir Perek Vav, Pasuk Dalet, you can look it up. Let me explain what this is. First of all, there's something very interesting here. He takes for granted that Malchus of Malka v'Sareh is only b'shleimus when there's a Beis HaMikdash. The fact that we today have a Malchus, Baruch Hashem, it's beginning of a process of Malka v'Sareh, we have that, but that's not yet. When we talk about the Kiyum Din of a Malcha v'Sareh b'Goyim Ein Torah, that means the Chayra Astu, until we have a Beis HaMikdash, as I state in Gra. That's Hanacha 1. You know, we can talk about each of these are besichtas for themselves, but just learn how to read a Gra. That's number 1. Second of all, he says, goodness sakes, there's no Torah without, if there's no Malcha v'Sareh, if Malcha v'Sareh are not be'eretz Yisrael, but b'Goyim. And Pirkei Avos is Klal HaTorah. What do those words mean? What does it mean that Pirkei Avos is Klal HaTorah? The answer is very simple. We start Pirkei Avos with Moshe Kibul Torah Sinai, etc. The Rambam writes in the Hagdama of Pirush HaMishnah that Pirkei Avos has two purposes. Purpose number 1, morals and ethics, specifically for the Chavrei Sanhedrin and the leaders of Judaism, which at the time were the rabbis, the teachers, etc. Why? Because it's dafka the Gdolei HaUmah and the Chavrei Sanhedrin, which have to know midos more than anybody else. That's why you have also within Pirkei Avos hadracha for dayanim. Al tidon yechidi, al tasas b'chakorchei dayanim. That's not musar. There's hadracha for dayanim, including first will be a mensch. If the anhaga will be balei midas, ultimately this will trickle down to everybody else. That's one thing to know. That's the Rama. But then he said there's something else. And the second thing is because he wants us to understand the links in history called Shalshelis HaKabbalah. And here I have to explain something. We have a list, Moshe Kibbutz Torah Sinai, all the way until Shimon HaTzadik. That's what you have there. And then all of a sudden we go into the Kufas HaTanoim, and here all of a sudden we start talking about who are your Omer, who are your Omer, who are your Omer. Why isn't there who are your Omers before? Obviously that wasn't necessary. What's the purpose of the Hu HaYa Omer in Pirkei Avos? Hu HaYa Omer means to say that was his mantra. Shagar b'lashaynai kimavur b'rishayn. This is what the man used to say. This was his thing. I told my Talmidim once, I used to listen to Reb Chaim Zechan Levracha, Rashiv of Mir. After 2.5 years, he repeated himself constantly. I asked his son, why is he repeating himself? He's such a freaking genius. And he's a mind on his gabber. Why would he ever, after repeat himself in a Musa Sefer, a Musa Shmuz? So he says, you have to understand, he's not telling you speeches. He's telling you his inner life. He's revealing to you who he is. Well, that's who he is. You think after 2.5 years, he has revealed whatever he wants to reveal. You want to be another person? He won't say things because they're a drasha. He says them because that's who he is. That book that you have to have, Reb Chaim, what's called Leket Sichas Musar, that's his Hu HaYa Omer. I heard this from his son, Zechan Levracha, from Refa. And I can understand it. Yeah, sitting there for years and hearing him, I understand what that is. Yes, he spoke, he's Damatamtis. So the Hu HaYa Omer of these people, you know what that's for? To tell you who they are. And take away all the abbreviations before the name and after the name. Okay, who was he? Who was he? You know what? You'll see. What's his mantra? What's Shagar b'lashaynai? This is a man of high-powered ethics. And we need that to trust the Shalshelis HaKabbalah. To understand they weren't just major scholars, but they're also enormous people as concerned. And people like that, that kind of idea of a person gives heavy weight to that link in history. Therefore, yes, I always say, I'm from because of the Rashba. Spend all my life trying to crack him. I think I know him pretty well. You know what I mean? Spent a lot of years trying to understand him and all his literature. And I tried to hold his pulse. I got a few guys like that. You know what? At the end of the day, I trust him. You get to know these people. You understand, oh, yeah, okay, I'm not arguing with you. For me, the idea to have a chain of history of people of such caliber, both academically, vicious legal scholars, like, woo, they don't take prisoners, none of them. Okay, and enormous personality and enormous people and character, etc. You know, like the one word of Rabbi Akiva, called Safuiva Rosh Tuna. It's a one-liner of wow, and the Rama writes, "Ru'im advarim lemisham ram." That would be enough. If I would, you know, that's his mantra of Rabbi Akiva. You know how much literature is written on that one sentence? And that's Rabbi Akiva. You want to know what Rabbi Akiva is? That. Because that's what Rabbeinu HaKodesh put down in the Mishna. He says, what is Hu HaYa Omer? That. So we need this to understand who they were. Where do they get these things from? So the Gra Klal HaTorah. What does Klal HaTorah mean? And you have to explain something. I think it's quite simple. There's a lashon of the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, Perik Tes, Halacha Aleph. So the Rambam, we all know we're going into Shabbos Bereishis soon, and Noach. Everyone knows the Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Noach. You learned Sanhedrin, or if you didn't, you will. Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Noach. So you all figured out those are Noahide codes. You know, what's the name of the guy that ran around? Heads this, what's this called? Whatever, Wendell something or another. What's his name? From the Raiders of the Ark. whatever. So he's the head of the Bnei Noach group. I met some of these people in South Africa. They're really unbelievable. I gotta tell you a story. Here I have a friend that used to be a rabbi in what you call Claremont, was a big shul in Cape Town area. So kid said there's a whole group of Bnei Noach there which really walked away from the Christian church and they became really Bnei Noach. One of the pastor took his whole flock with him and they became Bnei Noach. A kid said, they're very frum. Believe me, they're very frum. In the shul there, it's a oisi yom yom yidroshu. But these guys go to shul every day, you know what I mean? A kid says, so you understand, in this shul there was the small, short, little Litvish shamish, the sexton, a little real Litvak, type of Yiddish. And, so the priest, the pastor, the Bnei Noach goes to Rabbi Lerner and says, Rabbi, I'd like to come down with you people on Yom Kippur. It was my pleasure. So he says, let me sit in the back. So afterwards he gets, I can't sit in the back. There's too much talking there. So he puts him up in the Mizrach. And then he prostrates him on the floor. And then he says, Rabbi Lerner tells me the Shamish, the guy's name says, was tut sich da? Abeneach. The Kevim in Yom Kippur. He couldn't understand that a Benoach falls Kairim in the shul on Yom Kippur. But Lamais, it's unbelievable. It says that there are really. I think of Bnei Noach. I think there are people which we have to learn from everybody. That's what I'm trying to say. We have to take. There are people who have to take this seriously. I had a friend which was a rabbi in Norwood, California. And his first rabbinate was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Now, if you know Lancaster, Pennsylvania, that's Amish town. I don't know if you've been to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It's worth going. So he had a OU, he was the rabbi of the Hechsher, the OU, and there was a Hechsher on a bakery. And the young lady which was working in the bakery, her name was Nancy. And the Amish ladies, they're always wearing a bonnet and an apron. I mean, you should go and see. It's really worth it. So he asked her once, Nancy, why are you wearing the bonnet? She says, Rabbi, that's my prayer bonnet. But Nancy, you're baking. You're not praying. Rabbi, I am always praying. I learned a lot from that bonnet. And I think we all have to learn a lot from certain things. You have to learn a lot from everybody as much as we can. That prayer bond is the big mechayev of all of us. It's called Shivisi Havai L'Negzi Somit. The first Sifra Shulchan, for goodness sakes. That's Nancy's prayer bond. That's supposed to be the yarmulke on our head. Yeah, when's the last time you remembered it? You just want to know what name of the girl was that crocheted. Well, let's be honest. You know what I mean? I teach ladies, and they're all doing this all the time. Just tell you, is it somebody? No, I'll find one. It's so cute to see. Anyway, so going back to here, you have to understand. So we all know there's 7 mitzvahs of Bnei Noach, but the Rambam says no. Historically, it's not true. Al shisha dvarim nitztava adam harishon, and Noach only added Ever Menachai. How does he know it? It's a medrash, and then the Rambam writes something very interesting. Afal pi shekulan kabbalah hein biyadei Moshe Rabbeinu equals. How do I know that this medrash isn't metaphor and actually is an accurate depiction of history? Stam medrash does not have to be an historical fact. So just it says it's rumors in the mikros of La'avdov, La'shamra, and the Chazal say this means this mitzvah, this means that mitzvah. No, it's Torah Shabbat Peh. How do I know that that's an historical fact? And then he asks another question. Vardas Noitelem. They are logical, implying that which Rabbi Nissan Goren teaches us in the Agdama, that logic is mechayev ad kedei oynish misa, so it wouldn't have to say it. If it's logical, why do you have to have dafke that historically was said to Adam Rishon? So how does he know? How do I know that this medrash is a historical fact? So the Rambam Michlal Divrei Torah Yeroeh, for my total scope of the totality of Torah, it would seem to be Shal Elu Nitztavu. Yes, that this is a historical fact. You know, this is a frightening Rama. I heard from my Rebbe Zechan Levacher from Zisla Broid in the name of Moshe Motcha Epstein, Yeshiva of Slobodka in Slobodka. This is the one Rambam that no one can argue with. You can argue with his rayas, but the Rambam tells you, Michlal Divrei Torah, from my total understanding of the total mass, I've developed a intuition to understand which medrash is history and which one is allegorical. I'm telling you, near the Daiti Harechava, Dr. Rambam, from my total picture, yeah, this is real. Go argue with it. How can you argue with the Chlal Divrei Torah of the Rambam? It's a frightening Russian Rambam. What state in this Rambam? That's what I need to know. Chlal Torah means to say, not the laws, but the total distillation of the total mass of information. What values and ideas do you develop? What do you get from the total distillation of all the Pirtei Halachos? That's called Klal HaTorah. From the total picture of it all, a nice little boy knows if it's 10, 15 blettelach in each Masechta. So what does he know? You don't open your mouth in Baba Kama until you can say, I know Baba Kama is the beginning, and there's an end. When you start with the box and you end with the Hadron, that's Baba Kama. You finish that 5, 10 times, then you open your mouth. Before then, do me yourself a favor. Klal Divrei Torah means to say the total mass of material which I encompass, which I am capable of actually distilling it into ideas, values, a Weltanschauung, a way of seeing things, developing a healthy intuition. If you get used to learning a Rishon well and you know it well, after a while, when someone tells you Pshat L'Raj, you say it's very sweet, but that's not what he meant. How do you know? That's what I'm saying here. I can't prove it to you. I know it. From where? From all that. I know him. I know this. Go argue with a thing like that. You can't argue with that. That's Klal Divrei Torah. The distillation that you have from the Pirtei Halachos, which develop into a whole broad world view. That's Klal Divrei Torah. I think I once saw this. I went at a wedding in London, and that's when I did the first time I did this as a drasha. I remember before I got married, so I had a chassan shmuz. Oh God, we're not even get even close to anything, but it doesn't matter. Chassan shmuz with the mashgiach of Chevron Yeshiva was Reb Meir Chadash. And you know, before you get married, you go to the mashgiach, and you know, he gives you, so to speak, advice. I went to him because he had this beautiful picture of him and his young wife when they were young. The guy was like 90 when I spoke to him, but he's still walking around hand in hand in Malchi Yisrael with his wife. You know, so, very sweet to see this. They don't do that today, but once upon a time was a nicer, normaler world. So it used to be a picture of, I used to have the key to their house. When we used to go on vacation, I used to rummage in the family pictures. So he trusted me. Oh God. Anyway, so you know, so you saw that he was really very, 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 very married in a beautiful way. You know, talking to elderly people, but beautifully married. It was a pleasure just to see this. Okay, so here he goes and he says, "Okay, I was there for 10 years." So I said, "What did you learn here?" Oh, says, "Give me a break, you know the machzor, okay? No, start telling me each everything you learn." Okay, so he stepped it out like stepping teeth. What else did you read while you were here? Oh God, I'm a voracious reader. So, okay, at the end of the day, I was very tired from this whole thing. This, what do you want from me? I didn't understand yet. Okay, he pulled out this, whatever. Vosnach, okay, the bichalach. Okay, you know what bichalach? What books did you read? Then you know, I know you read Kuzri. What else? Okay, you know, right? So you got to start telling him Shalom Aleichem, Mendel, and whatever it be. At the end of the day, he looks at me and says, "I want you to understand. If you can't pour all that into the cup of coffee you pour your wife every morning, you didn't learn a thing here." That was my chassan shmuz. if you can't take all that, distill it into a whole way of living with your wife, all the values, Noshim Zikin, Zoyim, Maid, Kachim, Tyrus, V'chulu, with your bichala and whatever else is there, if you can't pour it into the daily cup of coffee, you didn't learn a word. That was your mayor's way of saying, Pirtei HaTorah are not enough, young man. You need Klal HaTorah. Can you distill it into a way of thinking, into a way of seeing, into a way of living, into your culture, into the glasses through which you look at reality? That's Klal HaTorah. If we don't have our malchus here, if we're just the people, members of a religion, so be very good at the Pirtei HaTorah. We have a lot of Shemini books. I don't know what, or a lot of, halacha books. We'll have all those, very nice. And the Shach and the Taz are beautiful. But to distill it into a way of life, we have to become your culture. Judaism with Gullus had lost the idea that religion is your culture. We are all members of the Western world, and that is our culture. We are of the Mosaic belief, and therefore we adhere to the codes of law of Sinai, Teshuvah, 7, Teshuvah. But what makes you feel happy and sad? What do you see? How do you see anything? Do you see it through the light of all those values? Oh, no. You're a Westerner, man. Elamai, you're from, not from is a bad word. You're Shemitah Torah mitzvahs. You're aspired to Shemitah Torah mitzvahs. I mean, for goodness sakes. I mean, we all feel queasy when we talk about Iran Yidachas. We relate the fact, thank God, Oh, we talk about Abba Mises Bez. No, Baruch Hashem, it happened once in 70 years. Blah, blah. They don't learn Sanhedrin. Kippah happened 3 times a week. You know what it is? They couldn't get you with Abba Mises Bez. They put you in solitary confinement and gave you a lousy diet, and you died from a bleeding ulcer. And that happens constantly. Just want you to know. People think, we're barbarians, right? And definitely, I don't think anybody cares too much about animal sacrifices. You're not really crying. I'd love to see skirted priests slitting throats of goats and sprinkling blood on altars with the Levine doing the music you get from the Muazzin over here. They're not going to be doing Bach and Mahler. You're going, you hear the stuff here in the neighborhoods? That's the Mishna's Levine. Get it straight. So you really think that's what you're dying for? Culturally, you are so far from biblical Judaism that it's beyond, it's worse than the abyss. I have a famous story. I used to travel for Karen Biavin when I, in my years of Bittul Torah, when I used to have to do Bechinas and other things. Baruch Hashem, I don't have to do that anymore. No, for 3 years I was associate Rosh Yeshiva. I came to the conclusion when I say Shaloy Sani Goy, I meant the Rosh Yeshiva. Believe me, no time to learn. Baruch Hashem, now we can only learn and teach. It's Gan Eden. I feel as if finally learning something. I mean, it's the odds, man. Guys, less than 10 hours a day is not learning. 6 hours is the balabus. That's the emes. Let's put this on the table. Learn. Okay. I had a chavrusa with my Rebbe. We started 6 and we ended at 1 with no smoking breaks. That's a chavrusa, you understand? Them 7 hours in Nishima Achas, like by Kiyas. Okay? That's learning. Less than that, it's arts and crafts. I don't know what it is. It's Nishka I want you to understand that. You have a musig of what Torah is supposed to look like. That's what Torah is supposed to look like. Okay, that's real learning. Okay, so you have to chop that here I am in my travels. There's something I love going to Baltimore because there's the train and it's quiet. No one bothers me, and you're a silent car, so you can't even have your phone open. Can't even the Elliot. Finally, I can sit and think for 2.5 hours on my own. I'm sitting down, plug myself down in this car. And all of a sudden, he goes, "Are you Rabbi Blachman?" Says, "I really want to say I'm Schwartz, but you know what I mean." "Oh, you idiot! Well, I don't want anybody here." She says, "How can I help you?" You put on a nice smile. And he's marketing techelis. he figures I'll be his billboard. He'll give me X amount of pairs for free. He figures I don't wear my tzitzis out. I'm not going to do what you want. Okay? But even my title is godly. He figures I'll do this, and I have, Shul Shimshon will come around and buy it too. So he'll make a killing. How do I get rid of a guy like this without being nasty? So it says, first of all, I want to be quiet. Second of all, I don't want to be other people's billboards. Third of all, I don't think it's holiness, but I'm not going there tomorrow. If you don't think it's holiness. You want to know why? Because the molecular structure of that holiness is equivalent to the molecular structure of indigo. Ultimately, there cannot be chemical tests to decide which one is which, and the Gemara says there is. So it can't be holiness. Just want you to know. It's not a suffix. I don't have a suffix. It's indigo. Right. The Gemara says you can do the chemical test. The Gemara says what the chemical test is. Okay, it's not pleasant to talk about. You know what I mean? But the chemical test with acid, is this indigo or is it holiness? It can't be if they have the same molecular structure. Goodness sakes. There can't be a chemical test. And there is. So it means it's not the same thing. So that's why I don't want this. Anyway, getting back to here. So I just want you to know. Okay? And if anybody thinks he does, should ask whoever his mentor is how he answers that question. I haven't got an answer yet, so I'm good. Okay? Anyway, so So I tell him, something, I would love to do this for you. But, understand, I'm a really bad place. Holiness doesn't work for me. He says, what do you mean, Rabbi? I'll tell you the honest truth. God says you wear this blue color, and when you see blue, you think about what? About the ocean. Listen, man, when I see blue, I think about an Energizer drink. Don't think about the beach. And if I would think about the beach, I'm not sure I would think about the water. Let's be honest. Okay, let's say I get into the water. No, I've been in the beach. I don't like swimming that much, but if I go to the beach, when's the last time I thought about the sky when I was in the beach? You've been in the beach lately? Have you thought about the sky when you were in the water? No. Obviously, that doesn't need to, what's good to do with it, man? Okay. And I say, I love astronomy. Okay. I really love astronomy. Okay. When's the last time I looked at the sky and I thought about Kisei HaKavod? Did anybody think about Kisei HaKavod last time you looked up in the moon? No. It means to say that obviously the basic idea of Techelis is based on a person whose culture is he thinks blue, he thinks water, he thinks sky, he thinks Kisei HaKavod. I am culturally so far from that, it doesn't work. So God obviously is saying that I'm off the charts, but what are you going to do? Do something which is not Mahakev anyway, and it's not going to get the result, so what for? He looked at me and says, are you serious? I says, yeah, I've been here. And he walked away. And I had my 2.5 hours. That's the honest truth. But the idea behind this is very clear. We are very far from what Kadosh Baruch Hu expected us to be. God actually expected us to be culturally a person thinking Tcheles will think Kisei HaKavod. I challenge anybody that has Tcheles at the moment, whether he sees that blue and thinks Kisei HaKavod. Please tell me what Kisei HaKavod is that you see. Does it have a lion there? Was there a cow? Got a cow and a lion, that's what it is, and an eagle. Well, you saw the Merkava of Yecheskel there. It's very interesting that you know it. You know what I mean? It's a little honest. It ain't real. It's simply artificial and not real. And why is that true? Because culturally, we are not culturally Jewish. We are culturally Westerners. The Torah has not become part and parcel of how I see things, not even my value system. I feel queasy about korbanos and capital punishment. I mean, just the idea of having Malchus Arboim, that's very common. I mean, that's flogging. That's like Iran, right? Like Saudi Arabia. I mean, there was this book, it was a New York Times bestseller called Living Biblically. This guy decided to live a year, according to the Chumash, with his own Torah Shabbal Peh. He walked around Central Park flicking, little pebbles at young couples that he thought were fornicating. So he was throwing pebbles at people in Central Park. You understand? I mean, goodness sakes, you understand? We are very far from that. Yes, culturally, we're very far from that. And God wants us to have that culture. And that's Malka B'Sareh B'Goyim. If we live together as a nation shares a homeland, shares a language, shares a history, ultimately develops a mutual culture and sees things in a certain way. What do you think language is? Language is the way of transmitting ideas which are shared by mass. For that, you have to see things in the same way, etc. It's not enough to have a technical language. You have to think. If an American speaks in Hebrew, you're not in Israel. You have to live in Eretz Yisrael to understand what it means to be a Ben Eretz Yisrael. Not push it. Takes time. Not easy. Takes time. It's a different world. With other values and other things, it is different. Well, thank God Jews are cosmopolitan, so we're like chameleons. We somehow, it works. But it's a cultural reality there. You have to understand that, and God wants this to be your culture. That's Klal HaTorah. Klal HaTorah means say there's no Torah of Klal HaTorah in Golus. It's the truth. Klal HaTorah is only when there's a nation with a culture which leads a daily, they have to pour that Torah into the cup of coffee. There's a system, there's a social system, there's government ministries, and they have to live with values of practically translating Zroy and Moed, Nosh and Ezekiel into Ben Adam L'Chaverei, into all these different things of what you call government policy and cultural reality. All that is missing in Golus and doesn't exist. That whole dimension of Torah was lost with the Churban. And thank God it's coming back slowly but surely. Baruch Hashem. We have the beginnings of a Geula, which ultimately will come to its seam. When Ben David will come, so this is what we're talking about. So before we go further, Yitzuma Sheyem of Shemini Atzeres is first of all is the idea, is the Chagiga of Klal HaTorah. Now here I want you to understand something. I don't think I'm able to do all of this, but at least a little piece to understand. If we understand that the Chagiga of Shemini Atzeres is because it's the siyum of the Avodah of Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Hoshana, Raba, and Biz Shemini Atzeres. That's what this is. Now let's understand what that Avodah is. Zok the Gra, we all know the famous Gra in Shir Ashir and Perik Aleph as to why Sukkos is found on the 15th day of Tishrei. He says basically, when the Jews did what they did, their Oved Avodah Zarah with the Egel, there was a Siluk HaShechina. The Anani HaKavod left them. There was Siluk HaShechina. They had no more regular Hashgacha, B'Kadosh Baruch Hu. And then afterwards, God was Misratza and gave us Luchas Shnias on Yom Kippur and says, I forgive you. Moshe comes down on Yud Aleph B'Tishrei and tells the Jews, listen, God not only forgives us, he now wants to reside among us. I'm going to explain that in 2 minutes. And then they obviously went to collect what was needed. Babayke, which means say 2 days that you have already is ready, Yud Beis and Yud Gimel. And in Yud Dalet, they called the Anshe HaMelach and went and took it all. And in Teshuvah, they started doing Meleches HaMishkan. At that point of time, the Anani HaKavod came back. Sukkos, my friends, is celebrating the relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu after we blew it. It's not a first love. It's a love that went sour. Within 49 days, we had a girlfriend. Holy cow. Okay, whatever that is, I'm not going there at the moment. We fornicated. And God decided, you know something? Our connection is so deep that won't bother me. I want you to understand the depth of what this is. You're all going to be married. God help. And you're all going to make mistakes. I'll sign it. You're all going to say things which are stupid or do things which are stupid. And I want to tell you right now, saying sorry doesn't work. Because the residue is there. The question is not what you did. How could you do it? And you know how you fix these things? This is Zuckin Armour talking to you. How do you fix these things? By finding a place where your relationship is so deep that is small talk. That's an aberration. It's meaningless. The only way you do teshuvah by really fixing things, if you basically find a place in your relationship with that other stuff, really doesn't matter. And I'm going to tell you a story that happened to me. Sometimes I used to do this. I try not to do it anymore. So one couple came to me and they had nebuch problems. And each one was talking about the other. Woohoo! So what do? I throw the guy out of my library. I sit with her and I say, listen, you just described a super jerk. Why do you want to stay with him? Get rid of him. Why'd you marry him? She says, are you kidding? He is so special. And he is this. And he is that. And he's Hashem Mavarech Me'atav. You know what? Huh? So why do you focus on that? So if that's the case, what he did, what these other things, shtiyat, the small talk. Then I called him in. You just said she's a machshefer, I don't know what. Why'd you marry him? Are you kidding? He starts telling me also, actually, Mizrael David, all the mindless types. So what are we doing? So all you guys have to do is always remember why you got married. What happened afterwards, these are aberrations. Find the shirish of your relationship, and the other stuff is small talk. Believe me. Your relationship with God is as such that if you go to the core relationship between God and man, you realize how deep and profound it is. You go back to, listen, I know I messed up. I want to be with you. I messed up because I don't think about you. I messed up because I don't live with God awareness. I messed up because Shemini Summit is the one Sif in Shulchan Aruch I'm never Mekayim. I mamish want to think about you. I want to be with you. God says, yeah? Okay, the other stuff is small talk. It's a Maral in the Siva Teshuvah, Seif Perek Aleph, which writes this. Shavim el Hashem, shu shoykan, shoyrish kan, imtsoim, hachet mistalik me'elov. Last few lines of Perek Aleph, Nesiva Teshuvah, the Maral. Going back to a God awareness is what this is all about. So I want you to understand, okay, I'm going to quarter. I did the Akdama, I didn't do the meet, some other time. But Rabbi Tarek and I have to finish, right? Does that mean yes? What? You say yes. Anyway. So I just want you to know that the pasuk says on Shemini Atzeres, Nagila v'nismacha boch. It doesn't say Nagila v'nismacha boy. Nagila v'nismacha boch. Yalkut Shemini Pinchas Simon Tov Shin Pei Beis. What a beautiful one this time, right? says, I don't know whether Bach means in the Yom Tov or Bach means in the Melech, that I'm in an intimate relationship. And he says, since it says Nogila v'Nizbecha, boy means it's God and not with the Yom Tov. Look it up in your Bach b'Sei Roscha, Bach b'Yeshuah. You know, you celebrate, you've come back to him. You are now celebrating the fact that we had Luchas Shniyos. In fact, you're not celebrating Shavuos, you're celebrating the fact we have Torah of Teshuvah. The whole of Sukkos is the idea that God decided he wants to be with us, although we messed up. He wanted to live with us more than anything before. He wants to be with us. If you want to be with me, I want to be with you. And that's Sukkos. You know, you say, that's Pesach. He chose us. You know, you choose from what's around. You don't choose, you choose not always the best. You choose from what's available. Ahavta Yisanu, but you know, by Shavuos, we were Kabbal the Torah, he actually loved us. But no, love is not the end. And then it says, Ratzisa, but you actually wanted to be with us. When is that? That's Sukkos. Ahavta Yisanu is Shvu B'chartan B'charbanu. B'chartanu is Pesach. Ahavta Yisanu is Shavuos. But Sisa Banu, you mamish ritzu, you want to be with us, is Sukkos. When God says, and not only have I forgiven you, I'm going to be with you. I'm building a Mishna for me and you. And you can look at the continuance of that tefillah. We've been elevated in other cultures equals Pesach, it's Yis Mitzrayim. Kitashtanu v'mitzvaysecha is Matan Torah. V'karavtanu malkeinu l'avodasecha is the being Hamikdash and the Mishkan of Sukkos. As we explained to the Gra, we're talking about different stages of our relationship with God. We're talking about what you celebrate on Sukkos is the fact that God is with us and don't let us go. Because we want to be with him. But it's so interesting. First, the whole day of Sukkot, we talk about how much we care for God's people, God's world. After we care about God's agenda for the world, we say, God, we just want to be with you alone. That's Shemini Atzeres. It's an intimate encounter. God, I want to be with you, and you want to be with me. So the simcha is not with anything else but Bach b'Yeshuascha. What Yeshuascha means? The David Hashem Ori v'Yishi, Yishi ze Yom HaKippurim. The Kapur of Yom HaKippurim, yeah. Bach b'Yeshuascha, the simcha you're supposed to have on Shemini Atzeres is the simcha of the Kapara. It started with Yom Kippur and ends with the Musaf of Shemini Atzeres as discussed. Ubach b'Teirasach. Bach b'Teirasach, I want a relation with you through your Torah. Let me just explain in 2 words what that means. No, the word chachma means different things. When I talk about human chachma, I talk about things which I process through my 5 senses, my experiences, which I translate into mental images, and they become my wisdom. Should I be isolated, not have any experiences, I wouldn't have any wisdom. All wisdom of man are nothing more than the processing of all the experiences he's had, whether the experiences of reading, seeing, hearing, his 5 senses. He translates that into mental cerebral images, and that's called his wisdom. So the Rambam and Hilchos Teshuvah and also Hilchos Seder Torah HaKadosh Baruch Hu with something else. He doesn't internalize other experiences because he had wisdom before he created anything outside of him. It was with his wisdom he created the world. Look at the Targum Onkelos on Bereshis Bara Elokim. B'chachmasa Bara Elokim. Look at the first Targum Onkelos. Ramban mentions it. Where do you get the chachma from? If chachma means internalizing external experiences, where was there anything outside of him? The answer is that the Rambam, no. We talk about God's chachma. It's not his processing external phenomena. It's an expression of his infinite self. So when you learn the chachma of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're internalizing an expression of the infinite self of God. That's a heavy communion, my friends. Your brain is full of his chachma, which is an expression of his infinite self, not his will, not his whim. Atzmios habayra. And that's a frightening thing to think about when we learn Torah. Bach b'Torasech, I want to be with you on Shemini Atzeres. What's the biggest being with God is learning his Torah. The famous mimer, the Balatanya, in the Kutei Torah in Parshas Vayikra, where the Rebbe writes, there's no greater dveikus in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but limud nigla of Torah, lahavin is a sugya al-burya, michol tzad and michol pina. Clarity in learning is the greatest connection you can have with God. This is the first Lubavitcher Rebbe wrote. He writes, not tefillah, not mitzvahs, not even learning, he writes before, not learning Kabbalah Chassidus. Dafka nigla, he says. Unbelievable. He writes, the Iker Dveikus HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a nigla b'Torah b'iyu nimrods. Learning and really internalizing the wisdom of those ideas is internalizing God's chachma, which is based on the expression of the infinite God. So we haven't got to rain, but we know it's a heavy day. And we know what we're celebrating is the fact of our relationship with God, which was rejuvenated on Yom Kippur and ends with Shemini Atzeres, that we know. And the way to celebrate it is Taket Torah. So if we have the idea that Simchas Torah, how does that fit with Shemini Atzeres? That's what it is. When you dance with those Sifrei Torah, you're saying, Boch b'Torasach. Your Torah, all of your Chochmah lies in those scrolls. Afterwards has Torah Shabbat Peh, whatever it only be. Iker Torah, as the Goy writes in Atzeres Eliyahu, is the Mikra the way it is. He calls that the Amita Shel Torah. Not everything in Torah Shabbat Peh is exactly a simple interpretation of Torah Shabbat, to say the least. I in Atzeres Eliyahu Reish Parshas Mishpatim. What you're celebrating is Bach b'Torasach. There's no bigger Bach b'Torasach than the Sefer Torah that you'll be dancing with. That's the pshat in the Shemini. It says, okay, I think we have to stop. Have a great Yom Tov. I'm sorry we couldn't finish this some other time. Bracha v'atzlacha. Shima Tova.